Alright, this is the video for Lesson 7.10, Seeking a Better Way. As industrialization grew, so did the interest in protecting workers and advocating for their rights. Samuel Gompers, a cigar maker by trade, consolidated a number of craft unions into the American Federation of Labor. Others organized both skilled and unskilled workers. A group known as the Wobblies, Industrial Workers of the World, wanted just one union for everyone. Regardless of organization, labor sought protection, participation, and political power. Goals for today's lesson: describe the organization and focus of the American Federation of Labor in Samuel Gompers, recognize the government response to organized labor, and describe the philosophy of socialism. Lesson resources: be sure to get your reading guide and lesson answer key. And let's begin reading on pages 515. Okay, here we are on page 515. We'll start with the heading, the American Federation of Labor. As the Knights of Labor faded into memory, another organization began to rise. The American Federation of Labor, called the AFL, was founded in 1886 as an alliance of individual craft unions, organizations of skilled workers in a specific trade such as carpentry or plumbing. Samuel Gompers, a proud, square-jawed man fond of tall silk hats and good cigars, was the AFL's first president, a post he held until his death in 1924. Born in London to Dutch-Jewish parents, he immigrated to the United States at the age of 13. Growing up in New York, Gompers learned the cigar-making trade from his father. Under Gompers' leadership, the AFL grew steadily. Unlike the Knights of Labor, the AFL focused not on all workers, but on skilled, highly paid craft workers, which at the time meant that the AFL's membership was mainly composed of white men. Of the 13 founding unions in the AFL, 11 did not admit women. Instead of seeking to transform the American economy, the AFL and its member unions focused on bread and butter issues: wages, working conditions, and the length of the workday. Unlike the Knights of Labor, which preferred political action to strikes, the AFL stayed clear to politics and negotiated directly with factory and business owners. When individual businessmen or corporations refused to meet their demands, AFL unions were quick to strike. They sought to use their main strength, their numbers, to a great advantage. This practical approach enabled the AFL and its member unions to survive an economic depression in the 1890s. The Homestead Strike. Even as the AFL grew, it suffered its share of setbacks. One of the worst occurred at Andrew Carnegie's Homestead Steel Works. When Carnegie appointed Henry Clay Frick chairman of his company, Frick set out to smash the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, a union associated with the AFL. In June 1892, in response to a cut in wages, steelworkers at Homestead went on strike. Frick proceeded to fire every employee who refused to leave the union and take a pay cut. He replaced the striking workers with non-union workers. He built a 15-foot high fence around the mill and topped it with barbed wire and searchlights. He hired a private army of 300 detectives from the Pinkerton Detective Agency to protect the replacement workers. On July 6, 1892, as the Pinkerton detectives approached the mill, angry union members were waiting. No one knows who fired the first shot, but a gun battle followed. At least 7 strikers and 3 Pinkerton agents were killed. Pennsylvania's governor sent an 8,000 National Guard troops to put down the uprising and protect the non-union workers. The strike broke the union at Homestead. Frick reopened the factory as a non-union workplace. The remaining workers had their wages cut and their workdays extended from 8 to 12 hours. So they're basically being punished for what they participated in. Eugene Debs and the Pullman Strike. In 1894, what began as a railway strike in a small town in Illinois quickly spread and crippled the economy in many states. The town Pullman was a community set up and owned by George Mortimer Pullman, whose Pullman Palace Car Company manufactured luxury railroad cars for the major rail lines. In this company town, Pullman did not let his workers buy their residences. They could only rent. Pullman owned the schools, the library, and the post office. He called the workers his children and planted spies to report back to him so he could make sure they were staying in line. When the United States plunged into a deep economic recession in 1893, Pullman laid off more than half of his workers. For those workers who remained, he cut their wages but did not reduce their rents. When a group of his workers protested, he fired them. Pullman's strong-willed ways met their match in Eugene Debs, founder and leader of a new American Railway Union. Born into a working-class immigrant family of 10 children, Debs dropped out of school and started working at the age of 14. His experience in the Terre Haute and Indianapolis Railroad acquainted young Debs with the dangers of industrial life. He later explained, As a locomotive fireman, I learned that the hardships of the rail in snow, sleet, and hail, of the ceaseless dangers that lurks along the iron highway, the uncertainty of employment, scant wages, and altogether trying lot of the working men, so that from my very so that from my very own boyhood I was made to feel the wrongs of labor. Deb's sense of hardships of railroad life led him to try to unite all the railroad workers, skilled and unskilled, into a single massive union. In 1893, he founded the American Railway Union and served as its president. Unlike the American Federation of Labor, the American Railway Union included railroad workers from every skill and pay level. By 1894, Debs was prepared to use his union's growing power to resist George Pullman. The American Railway Union launched a nationwide boycott against the Pullman Company. No member of the union would work on a train that pulled a Pullman car. Within days, 150,000 of railroad workers were out on strike. Hundreds of thousands of Americans donned white ribbons to show their solidarity with the workers. Because Pullman cars were widely used, the nation's railways ground to a halt. What began as a limited boycott had become a national strike. And let's look at this graph here quick of union members. See, it was increasing, took a dip there between 1890 and 95, and then grew drastically from the years after. And back to this paragraph. The federal government acted quickly to end the strike. The federal courts declared the strike illegal. Although Debs urged an orderly boycott, some strikers engaged in clashes with deputies hired by railroads. In July 1894, President Grover Cleveland sent federal troops to help end the strike. In Hammond, Indiana, federal and state workers fired into a crowd that had swarmed onto the tracks, killing an unknown number of protesters. In Chicago, pro-strike crowds destroyed tracks, turned over boxcars, and burned railroad property. Eventually, 14,000 troops and policemen occupied the city. With the help of federal troops and pro-railroad judges, the strike quickly collapsed. Debs was jailed for contempt of court for ignoring a judicial injunction to end the strike. Debs' attorney, a young man named Clarence Darrow, claimed that the decision left the law so biased that the government could send a man to prison without trial by jury. The Pullman strike weakened the labor union movement and showed again that the federal government was willing to take the side of big business. The Cripple Creek miners' strike. Not every labor action ended in failure. The same year that the railroad workers lost the Pullman strike, a group of miners in Colorado managed to achieve their demands. Many of them belonged to the Western Federation of Miners. When mine owners in Cripple Creek, Colorado, decided to extend the working day but not raise wages, the miners went on strike. The Cripple Creek strike of 1894 seemed destined for a violent end. Miners passed around rifles and dynamite, while the owners hired a private army and prepared for battle. At this point, Colorado Governor Davis H. Wade stepped in. Unlike most state governors, Wade sympathized with organized labor. He met with managers and union representatives and helped the union get an 8-hour workday at a decent wage. He then sent in the militia to keep the peace rather than crush the strike. Alternative visions. The collapse of the Knights of Labor, the disappointing conclusion of the Homestead Battle, and the fall of the American Railway Union were dangerous signals for organized labor. In this climate, some labor leaders were impatient with Samuel Gomper's bread and butter unionism for skilled workers, and instead pursued alternative paths to better the lives of all workers. The Socialist Party. One alternative came from the Socialist Party, formed in 1901. Socialism is an economic and political system that emphasizes government control of productive property, such as factories and land, and regulation of the distribution of income. In a socialist system, community ownership is preferred over private ownership, and government control often replaces free play of market forces. Socialist ideas have been circulated in Europe for decades, but came relatively late to the United States. In America, the Socialist Party included former members of the Knights of Labor and the American Railway Union, as well as many German and Russian Jewish immigrants with European socialist backgrounds. In their view, wealthy factory and business owners kept workers trapped in a life of near poverty. They argued only by controlling the means of production could ordinary people build a more equitable and just society. In 1911, more than 300 American cities and towns had socialist mayors or other leading officials. Many farmers in the Southwest signed up as members of the Socialist Party. After emerging from prison after the Pullman strike, Eugene Debs became a socialist and the spokesman for the party. He ran for president of the United States several times as a socialist candidate. In 1912, he drew about 900,000 votes, roughly 6% of the national total. Although Debs came in fourth place in the election, his message had an unmistakable appeal. As one journalist begrudgingly put, that old man with the burning eyes actually believes there can be such a thing as the brotherhood of man. And that's not the funniest part of it. As long as he's around, I believe it myself. The Wobblies. In 1905, a group of radical workers met and formed the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, nicknamed the Wobblies. Unlike the AFL, which focused on organizing skilled workers, the Wobblies argued that the only way to improve the lives of workers was to enroll them all, skilled and unskilled, into one big union. If every worker joined a single organization, then, as one IWW member explained, the workers of the world have nothing to do but fold their arms and the world will stop. In the Wobblies' worldview, and as you see that's from that poster, folding their arms, nothing's going to happen until the workers decide that their aims are met. In the Wobblies' worldview, labor and capital were antagonists by definition. One of the founding statements asserted the working class and the employing class have nothing in common. The Wobblies were led by a former head of the Western Miners Union, Big Bill Haywood, a burly socialist who did not shy from the use of guns or explosives. Although they did not stop the world or overturn capitalism, the Wobblies did enroll tens of thousands of unskilled workers in their ranks. They preferred direct action to political action or collective bargaining with employers. They made broad demands and threatened the government and owners of major companies with massive strikes. In 1912, a textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts displayed the IWW strategy. At the time, Lawrence was the foremost textile town in the world. Some 40,000 workers toiled in its mills. Only about 200 of them were members of the American Federation of Labor. After a wage cut and speed up, the workers spontaneously left the mills in protest. They took to the streets chanting, "Better to starve fighting than to starve working." With the help of the IWW, the strikers organized and embarked on a nationwide publicity campaign to show America how poorly they had been treated. One of the Wobblies who came to Lawrence to help the strike, 21-year-old Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, told the workers the entire wage system needed to be abolished. The strikers sang the International, the anthem of the International Socialist Movement that urged workers to unite and overthrow their capitalist masters. As the Lawrence strike dragged on and food ran low, the strikers decided to send their children out of town to other families for care. But at the railroad station, police clubbed children and women and set them scattering. The bad publicity that followed forced the textile owners to give in to the workers' demands. The Lawrence strike was over. The Wobblies had won, for the moment. In the upcoming years, the Union fell apart as the nation approached the First World War. Labor's gains and losses. By the second decade of the 20th century, the only real success story for organized labor in the United States was Gomper's American Federation of Labor. And by 1904, the AFL had over 1.5 million members in 120 unions, more than the Knights of Labor ever had. Neither the political action of the Socialist Party nor the direct action of the Wobblies overturned the new industrial order. Capital continued to hold the upper hand over labor, in part because industry leaders had powerful allies, including judges who did not hesitate to issue injunctions and throw labor activists into prison, and government officials who sent state militias and federal troops to crush strikes. Still, the battles of labor are evidence that American workers were willing, sometimes at great risk, to make their demands known and their voices heard. All right, let's go back now. There's a couple inserts that we did not look at. Okay, here is this excerpt from Edward Bellamy's Utopian Vision. And you can read through that on your own. I'm not going to do that here in this video today, but let's go back to Mother Jones. Mother Jones. She was born Mary Harris in 1830, but to many American workers, she was known simply as Mother Jones. An Irish immigrant, she moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and married George Jones, an iron worker and union member. In 1867, tragedy struck when her husband and 4 children died in an epidemic of yellow fever. Mary Jones moved to Chicago and worked as a dressmaker. She joined the Knights of Labor. She agitated for safer workplaces, higher wages, shorter workdays, and especially reforms for child labor laws. Her powerful speeches roused working-class crowds and urged them to join the Union Boys. She helped the United Mine Workers and was a founding member of the Industrial Workers of the World. Even in her 80s, she traveled across the country, organizing workers and confronting managers. When Mother Jones died in 1930, one speaker at her funeral urged people to remember her fiery words, "Pray for the dead and fight like heck for the living." All right, let's go back to our lesson. And we see, don't forget, you should have your reading guide filled out. If you need to use the lesson answer key to help you do that, go ahead. And the next activity is complete a match for labor online activity. The chapter 22 highlights online, these here, and then the quiz at the end. So let's take a moment. Well, the next video will start with the online activity and look at what you need to do for being successful on the quiz. So this is the end for this video, and the next one will start shortly.